plan is to continue on with controlled environment ag and then switch into plant growth and responses to the environment, which I just posted some slides on that right before I came in. And so we'll do that today. Wednesday will be the exam review session for the most part. And so come prepared to ask questions. So far, the draft of my exam, I don't have it complete, but photosynthesis is an important topic. It's showing up, some good points are coming from that topic. So that includes the light, and I'm thinking about both the light reactions and then like the Calvin cycle, the CAM cycle, the C4, the PCO, right? There's a lot within those two slide sets that you need to think about. And so that's been a while since we've, gone over that topic. So tomorrow or Wednesday during the review period, make sure to ask questions if you're still struggling with aspects of that. So far anyways, there's a fair bit of points coming off of those two slide sets on the light reactions and the carbon fixation reactions of photosynthesis. And then, some of the other slide sets are shorter and not quite as detailed. So I'll give you more information on Wednesday as I continue to work on the draft of the exam, okay? Okay. I think we left off here. We're looking at the idea of, when you grow plants in an indoor environment, it's much easier to manipulate their environment to suit your needs for what you want that plant to accomplish in its lifetime. And so just looking at, we left off looking at light. So, you think about light quality or color, that can make an impact, of course. What wavelength of light are we looking at? Light quantity or intensity, how much? Certainly plays a role. And then the duration, how long? And I'll talk more about light again in this other last slide set on plant growth in a little bit more detail. Here we're looking at this idea that, on one plant you can have sun leaves versus shade leaves. It just depends on which leaf you're looking at, how much is it getting hit and how long with light. And you can see a shift in its morphology, in its leaf design, in order to accommodate whether it's mostly in sun or more often in shade. And so the sun leaf on the top tend to be thicker, multi-layered palisade. So those long column-like cells are the palisade cells. And so sometimes you'll see, instead of just one layer of palisade cells here, it almost looks like 2 or 3 layers of palisade. And then, so some leaves tend to be thicker, but smaller in surface area, whereas shade leaves tend to be thinner, not as many internal layers, and they tend to have a wider surface area so that they can try to scarf up rare bits of sun that do hit them in the understory. Okay, so what if you grow plants indoors? There's some options on what kind of light you provide them besides solar. So if you're totally indoors where you're not in a greenhouse, you really have to think about this. And so fluorescent lights, which are found in most office buildings, for example, they're low intensity, but they're okay for photosynthesis. That's why you can see plants in people's offices and they're surviving, they're doing fine. And so they're actually often used in growth chambers. That's what you see in most growth chambers, although you can certainly purchase, we do have a fancy LED light rack for one of our growth chambers. But fluorescent is fine if you're just like, I want to germinate some seeds and get some seedlings going. And growth chambers, you can find really decent quality fluorescent lights in there. Incandescent, not the best. Incandescent lights tend to be high in far red, which means that you can get plants that are what I refer to as leggy. They get tall and kind of spindly looking, and often you don't want that look in your plants. That's what I tend to see in my house plants because I don't have enough quality light coming in through the windows either. Whoever built the house had no concept of, if someone wants to have a plant in their house, what kind of windows and what facing direction should they be in. But anyways, high intensity discharge lights, HID lights, are kind of a relatively new compared to fluorescent anyways. So you can have high pressure sodium or metal halide. And I'm blanking on the moment. In the greenhouse, I think we have high pressure sodium, but I can't swear to that. We might have metal halide. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. I think they're high pressure sodium. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're high pressure. Because I think the high pressure sodium, when they initially come on, they take a while to like come to full in intensity. And that's what I tend to see when the lights come on first thing. So, but high pressure sodium, metal halide, those are very common as light augmentation in greenhouses because they're pretty potent in terms of providing the right quality of light and intensity of light for augmenting when it gets cloudy, or if you want to extend the light period into beyond sunset. And then of course, LED lights, light emitting diodes are the newest craze and have been around for a while, but the reason they're so popular currently is their prices come down quite a bit. And so they're much more affordable than the initial manufacturing time period. They are really good because they don't generate a lot of heat, so you can actually have your plant really close to the light and they won't have any overheating or burning issues. And they're really good for photosynthesis. You can actually tweak what quality of light you provide. You can actually buy different LED lights with, I want red light, I want blue light, I want both, I want, whatever. And so it just depends. And so there's a lot more businesses providing LED lights. So that's one of the reasons, besides the technology has improved, but then a lot more competition out there on people selling these, so the price has plummeted. When I initially asked to have our high pressure sodium in the greenhouse replaced with LED lights, they looked at the initial outlay of cost. This was many years ago. And they were like, no, we're not doing that. So, but now, many years later, I think I should maybe hit them up again and ask if they'd be willing to do that, because if you look at the initial outlay, yeah, okay, for a greenhouse, it might be a little pricey. However, once you purchase them, then, running them is very energy efficient. So it is attractive from that perspective. If they could just get over the initial sticker shock, hopefully I can switch, at least have some options of LED lights in at least some parts of the greenhouse would be really, really nice. So these are kind of the main ones that are used out there. And again, it depends on what you want to do, which light to pick, and your budget, of course. The high pressure sodium, we've had to replace those many times since I've been working here. So from that perspective alone, I think LEDs probably last longer. Good quality LEDs probably last longer. So when LEDs came on the scene and they were able to, very precisely give certain wavelengths of light to the plant, where they could, very deliberately do that, they really started to get into the different types of like what happens if you hit a plant with this wavelength of light versus that wavelength of light. And once they started learning more about that, they got really excited, because then they realized that you can really manipulate what's going on inside the plant by the quality of light it's exposed to. And that's a pretty simple thing to do, right? I mean, you're not spending a ton of money, you're not putting all these weird chemicals, you're just hitting it with certain qualities of light. And that can make a difference in its overall physiology. So this is a really hot topic right now in plant physiology research, where they're looking at how can we influence the quality of the crops. So they're looking at, in particular, these so-called bioactive compounds. That's kind of a buzzword or phrase. So they're looking at essentially secondary metabolites that the plants are making, and can we influence what secondary metabolites are getting made. With a lot of the goal here is for our human health and other animal health, because if you can improve the quality of the crop, of course, and they're also looking at nutrient density, like per gram of tissue. Can we increase the nutrient density per gram of tissue? Try to feed all these additional mulls by the year 2050. And so this is a pretty hot topic right now. So this is the abstract from this particular paper. This was published back in 2017. You see that the potential to revolutionize horticulture lighting and for crop production, protection, preservation, different wavelengths of LED can induce the synthesis of bioactive compounds and antioxidants, which in turn can improve the nutritional quality of crops. LEDs increase the nutrient contents, reduce microbial contamination, and alter the ripening of post-harvest fruits and vegetables, which is a huge thing in and of itself. So beneficial for human health. Non-thermal LEDs, that just means they don't give off a lot of heat, so you can really get some pretty good light exposure to the plant. So they're playing around with this, looking at different qualities of light. What happens if you provide the full visible spectrum versus just certain aspects, different wavelengths? And they're seeing a very noticeable impact on the plant physiology. So I think this is a really exciting area of research because it's pretty straightforward to manipulate. And once you learn about your plant a little bit more and do some research on it, you can really, shape in the crops that you want and that you want to sell. So very, very interesting. Here's another one that was published. This one is, what year is this? 2022. So this is published just last year. Indoor LED light on specialized metabolite biosynthesis in medicinal and aromatic plants, edible flowers, and microgreens. So again, looking at both foods that we eat as well as medicinal. So lots of interesting work going on. Please read through these abstracts and be able to discuss like what does LED do? Like give some basic examples like nutritional quality or secondary metabolite, like that. So I think it gives us some thought. And then I've seen quite a bit of uptick in, where did it go? I can see. Microgreens and edible flowers. That's really, there must be a growing business in both of those. When I taught my plant phys a few years ago, there was a student in the class whose family owned a microgreen business. And she actually did a really nice research project. In that class, they had to do a research project, and she did a really nice research project looking at different soil amendments to try to increase the how quickly they grow. And we couldn't afford to send the tissue off for analysis, but I wish we could have, because I think that could have been really interesting. Edible flowers is another thing that is becoming kind of a big business, I've noticed. So lots of research going on, lots left to do, but I think this has huge potential for being able to increase the quality of the plant that you're growing. Let's see. So if you go totally indoors, so they often say non-solar facilities, that just means you're totally indoors, you don't have any access to sunlight. They, generally say you need high light intensities in those conditions and good quality light, especially if you are trying to get that plant to flower. That's one of your goals. And if you, so sometimes you're just growing plants for flowers, for cut flower industry, or just for landscaping. Sometimes you want, of course, to get it all the way to fruits. And then you think about all of the vegetables out there. They're saying, you need pretty good highlight intensity. Leafy greens certainly can be grown under those conditions really well. Lots of herbs really well. And they claim cannabis can be grown under totally artificial light, but they claim it does best if some solar light. And does anyone know if that's true? Anyone involved in the cannabis industry? I mean, I know there's a lot of outdoor field plots of cannabis, both industrial and THC producing, but I know that there's some totally indoor grow facilities too, and they do just fine, right? I mean, so I think that last bullet point, I don't know, I'm not convinced. I think under the right I think that statement is maybe, because I think if you understand the plant well enough, you can provide the right artificial light and do it just fine. So I think that's a kind of a hasty, but I've seen that statement made in several places. So, but I guess I'd put a question mark there on that one. Not quite certain. But if you've ever wondered, when you walk by these facilities that they have that weird glowing kind of purplish light, that's because they often are using the red and blue quality only. And so it gives off that purplish hue. So that's a dead giveaway. That upper right picture is actually our freight farm, our growing. What do you call that? Not the freight farm, pardon? I think Carrie has a different name though. She calls it greenery. There we go. Yeah, the green. I call it the freight farm because I think that's business. Like, yeah. So I tend to say freight farm, but so that's a shot from, and that's just part of it that's been grown and being used. So you can see all those beautiful leafy greens. So I think that is when I have just 2 small hydroponic systems that sit on my kitchen table, and that's how I grow my leafy greens. I prefer to eat those over store-bought, although every once in a while I gotta do store-bought so I forget to get my hydroponics up and running. But it's so much fresher, and it's just so nice to grow your own, and you don't have to worry about. You might have heard just out in like, oh, these lettuce bags had to be recalled due to E. coli contamination. It's just so nice to grow your own and know that you don't have that issue. And so there's a lot I just bought one, was it last year at Menards? It was on sale. This little tabletop hydroponic setup, really cute. And I can't remember if I told you this, but I put it on my kitchen table. I was trying to brainwash my boys into, see, growing plants is fun. I'm trying to make them botanists, but so far they've resisted. One thing when they were toddlers, like 2 and 3 years old, one way they knew to get back at me if they were mad, like if I said, no, you can't have candy, we're about to eat dinner or something, they go up to one of my plants and break a stem off. Ooh, you're playing rough. So yeah, they knew how to get me going. Or they pluck a flower off. So yeah, the terrible twos. Luckily I have a very calm, it didn't blow up, but it's like, ah. All right. So okay, while we're talking about indoors, let's switch into the what's going on with the roots. And so when you think a little bit about this, soil is like what we tend to use in our greenhouse. We grow plants a lot in just basic soil. However, if you're doing growing plants that then ship, the soil weight can be a little bit of an issue. And so sometimes when you have to grow plants and then ship them, you will either switch out of soil or you'll just start growing your plants initially in something other than soil. And so you do have to think about weight and density of the material that you're working with. You want it to be heavy enough that it won't blow over. So if you have your pots outside during, the growing season during the summer, and that's part of your business, you don't want them blowing over all the time in heavy wind, but you don't want them too heavy for shipping. So it actually takes some thought. You obviously need good quality growing medium. You don't want it too compacted, too sandy, all of that has to come into play. So it has to have good water holding capacity and air pores, pore space. And then electrical conductivity, EC, and pH. And so they generally say, you want it between 0.75 to 2.0 electrical conductivity, which you can just measure with a probe. And they say if that shoots above 2, that means you might be dealing with some salt buildup, which can be pretty bad, because what happens then is it drives the water potential of the soil in that medium to negative. And it can actually start drawing water out of the roots into the medium, which is the exact opposite of what you want. You want water going from the medium into the roots. But remember, water moves from less negative water potential to more negative water potential. And so if the medium water potential gets too negative, more negative than the plant, what's going on in the plant can actually cause, that's what they refer to as root burn when they use that phrase, and it can lead to death. So not a good situation. You generally, we've talked about pH already, 5.5 to 6.5, but if you have soilless media, it can shift the pH. So you have to be aware of what the pH is of those different media. So on the image, you're seeing the, it has shifted, you know, and you see that gray bar running down the whole length. And so you can see that area is where most of the nutrients are more available, not all, but most. And so you can see that you can get a shift away from that 5.5 to 6.5. So when we typically say plants grow in soil pH of 5.5 to 6.5, we're thinking like real soil, not this soil of medium, all these options. So these options include sphagnum peat moss is probably historically the most common and has been longest used. That's the top left picture up there. And there's been some controversy over sphagnum peat moss. It is awesome though for plants in the sense that it is so good at holding water and then it slowly releases it. So that's why you see bags of potting soil at stores, almost always including sphagnum moss. And that's why it makes you not have to worry too much about watering or missing a watering cycle. It also is antiseptic or antimicrobial. It has kind of an acidic pH so that it can, and it also produces certain chemicals that are antimicrobial. And so they actually used to use it a lot to, like in baby diapers, the Native Americans would line their cloth diaper with this so that it would prevent, you know, microbes from causing problems, skin irritation, infection on the baby. It's low in salt and it doesn't break down very quickly, so you can use it for a long time. But sphagnum peat moss, depending on who you talk to, people will say it is unsustainable to keep doing this, to keep harvesting. It's not a very sustainable thing. It's not renewable. Other people who are in the sphagnum peat moss industry say it's renewable if you do it correctly, but there's a lot of places that aren't doing it correctly. So there's a lot of debate out there right now, and I urge you to kind of look into that more carefully if you're curious. But I've seen, you know, evidence being presented on both sides where, yeah, I think they're right. If you do it correctly, it could be renewable, but unfortunately, a lot of businesses aren't doing it that way. Pine bark is this top right picture, which is another option. And it's being, I see that more and more now showing up. I'm coconut fibered or coir, I have a hard time saying that word. I have a hard time finding that locally. Has anyone seen bags of that around? It's becoming popular, but I'm not here. I can't find it around here. I've gone to, you know, Menards, Maresy Oats, Lowe's, anywhere that normally sells that during summer. Can't find it. And so that's this middle left image here. So they're saying it's a good replacement for peat moss. They say it's more sustainable than peat moss. However, you got to be aware that it can be high in salt. And so you have to monitor that a little bit more than normal. Vermiculite is this middle right picture, which we use in the greenhouse now and then. And it is, I call it fake soil because it doesn't have any nutrients itself. It holds water pretty well. But I call it fake soil. So if you were to grow a plant totally in vermiculite, which I wouldn't recommend, but if you were to do that, it wouldn't get any nutrients from the vermiculite particles. Like there's no nutrients there. You would have to supply like a hydroponic solution to provide nutrients. So that's why I call it fake soil. And same with perlite. Perlite is fake soil. There's no nutrient value on it anywhere. There's no like ions stuck to it like you see with soil particles. So perlite's very popular. We routinely use that in the greenhouse, and you can find it readily in town. And it's just volcanic rock that's been heated and ground a little bit. And it doesn't hold water itself like vermiculite does, but it gives really good aeration to the growing medium. So typically what you do is you would have like sphagnum moss and a little bit of perlite mixed in to provide aeration, something like that. So you can mix these. It's not like you have to just do one or the other. Perlite is being shown here in the lower left, all the white. One problem that's starting to be more of a problem. Oh, I don't have that in the thing. Maybe it's in the notes. Where is it? Oh, there, disposal problem. It's right there. Yeah, so it's becoming a disposal problem because it doesn't readily break down when people get rid of it. And so they're starting to get a little worried about that. And probably the newest thing is this lower right image. It's rice hulls that have been parboiled, which when you think about how much rice is grown globally, there's a lot of rice hull waste. So this is a great idea. They take the hulls and parboil it, use it as an amendment. And so it can be very useful. But again, most of these don't really provide a ton of nutrients like vermiculite and perlite. There's no nutrients. Some of these others provide some nutrients, but limited. So you tend to have to add nutrients like a hydroponic solution to make sure they have the right nutrients, or fertilizer, for example. So you have to be a little careful about that. So in our greenhouse, we tend to use soil, and we might mix in some perlite or sphagnum peat moss or vermiculite. And again, it just depends on what you're trying to grow. And if you have to ship it, you have to worry about weight as an issue. And so in general, when you work with soilless media, especially if you really don't have any soil mixed in, it does create a little extra work, labor, because you have to be more careful in making sure that the plant is getting adequate nutrition. So it definitely has some upsides, but there's some cautions, I guess, that you have to think about too. So we have an indoor egg program, as you know, and so these are the left picture is a picture I took. I think this was during COVID, right? I can't remember what year that we were having like a show and tell soon after the first year, I think. And so you can see some of the systems that some of you are playing around with in those. And so I ordered 2 of these row towers. You already have one set up and running. Those of you taking the lab. And so those will be fun to play with up here. This lower right picture is a do-it-yourself hydroponic towers. There's 6 of them total. So she put them, this is Chelsea's project. She did a research project where she was looking at growing, in this case, bok choy. And we did treatments of either like normal hydroponic solution or hydroponic solution that's been amended with worm tea, where you take worm compost and make tea out of it, spike it into the hydroponic solution. And then she worked on that she even did it during COVID when we were shut down. She moved it to her house and did it there. And then when we were allowed to, we moved it back over to our building. But this is just one of the internal rooms. There's no windows in here. She had 6 replicate towers so that she could run the research. And she did find that the worm tea did provide an uptick in certain nutrients in the bok choy. And so some of the nutrient density did increase. Not everything, but some did. And so, but there's like a threshold level. We found that if we went above like 20% of the volume of worm tea, I think one of the treatments was 30% or something like that, that was too much. Then we started seeing a negative impact on nutrient density. So too much of a good thing. So there's like this balance that you have to, at least that study was showing a balance. And we read other papers that were showing similar. Too much, around 20% seems to be a good good rule of thumb for that kind of amendment. But again, from the indoor egg program, has that lab, aren't you getting a new lab at some point? Has that happened yet? Does it? I know that when the the money came through to redo the whole Jacob Betty, my impression was our part of it was going to be like after that. Like we're not getting it in with some package deal. Okay, yeah, so it'll get there. But I really do think for those of you that have never seen the indoor egg program, there's a variety of different systems that the students get training on, and even in aquaponics. And initially, when we designed this lab, we wanted the aquaponics to be tilapia fish, but we met with, in order to grow fish, because fish have a backbone, any organism that has a backbone, you have to go through IACUC essentially licensing, where they have to give you the okay to do this. And it is tightly regulated. And so it is complicated. It takes a long time to do the paperwork, and then you have to pass the inspection. And then you get routinely, like every so many months, you have to give reports and updates, and it's a lot. I even tried to do aquaponics with goldfish, and the same thing. They're like, nope, it's got a backbone. And I'm like, they're just feeder fish for the bigger fish. That's their life. And they like, nope. And so when I did a project up here with goldfish, it was a hassle. So that's why, isn't it still crawfish, I think? Shrimp? No, shrimp, crawfish. So they don't have a backbone. So you're allowed to just do whatever. But anything that has a backbone is tightly regulated at university, which, I understand. They need to make sure that the welfare of the animal is being taken care of. So, but that's the whole goal of the IACUC, is to make sure the welfare of the animals is okay, even during research purposes. But the aquaponic system is to grow, fish or crawfish or something where it is, of course, they're living their life, they're excreting out their waste products, and then the plants use that for nutrition. And so it becomes a sustainable circulating give and take between the plant and the other organism in the water. So when it's up and running and working correctly, it's pretty cool. I had a this is super fancy compared to the one I had here, where we just had tanks and like a floating like styrofoam with the plants sitting in that. It worked okay, but this one's much fancier. So yes, we do have an indoor egg program at NMU. So just for those of you who may not know, we have both an associate and a minor in that. And then we also have a controlled environment egg program that's at the bachelor's level. And so I was part of the team that helped implement all of this. So I really do think that this is the next big thing in terms of crop production and ways of growing plants to feed all these people on our planet. I think we have to look for other ways than just outdoor growing. And, with Professor Lucas, Evan Lucas, his expertise in construction management, repurposing buildings, when he came in on our team, and it was just a really good synergy of us working together. And then the administration found out what we were doing, and they said, hey, let's make a program out of it. So we worked to help design. So I think it's the next big thing, not just in big cities. When you think about places up here, in this latitude of the world, it's such a short growing season outside that it makes sense to think about these types of things. So indoor egg, you tend to go hydroponic. That's not always. You can certainly do soil-based growing indoors. There's nothing wrong with that. But hydroponics certainly has some benefits. And so there's different kinds of hydroponic systems. And one of the goals is to make sure that your roots don't get starved of oxygen. That's a huge thing to think about. So some way of providing that is important, whether it be air stones or just having the liquid ebb away from the roots, ebb and flow system, for example, or tilting it like that, where you have kind of movement across the roots, but they're not always submerged. Aeroponics, I've been playing around with that a little bit with one of my grad students. I think that's a great idea, but there's some limitations to those with the nozzles becoming clogged. They are really getting into the science of the size of the air or the water droplets. Like that's a real thing where they're noticing an impact depending on the size of the water droplet on the plant and its growth. So they're also finding that like plants that are grown for what they produce below ground actually do better than like leafy greens. Like here they're showing a leafy green being grown aeroponically, but they're actually finding things like potato grow better in aeroponics than other hydroponic systems, for example. They're looking at it for like ginger, because the ginger rhizome, what's the echinacea? Again, you're looking at the below ground parts to harvest. And so they're finding that aeroponics seems to be, it could be a better way to grow those types of plants where you're harvesting below ground parts. So that at least initial research results are showing that. So we'll see what happens with that. Ebb and flow, where you have the water coming in and then draining out on a regular basis. So again, this one study, this is a picture taken from one of the studies that was done, and oh, I see my thing got covered up. But basically they're looking at, they compared the substrate, what was the substrate? Mixture of peat and perlite was, so the substrate, those are plants grown in peat and perlite. And then they had a hydroponic system and then an aeroponic system. And you can just see by looking at this two different varieties of plants here, you can see obvious differences in especially the root, but also the shoot. And so again, the type of air or hydroponic system that you grow your plants in can make a difference in terms of how the shoots behave versus how the roots behave. And we find that pretty common in pretty much any, it's not just hydroponic systems. You get this kind of situation happening in soil-based growth too, where you really can see differences like, oh, wow, the shoot development was awesome, but the root development, not so good. And so it really does depend on what you're trying to accomplish. So again, if you're trying to grow potatoes, you might want to pick more of an aeroponic system, because here you can see the aeroponic roots really did well. But overall, in this particular study, they wanted the leafy greens. They didn't want super duper root tissue. That's not what they were selling. If you think about leafy greens, the green, the leaves. And so in this particular case, they said if you're going for that kind of production, you'd want the hydroponics over the aeroponics. So you have to give a lot of thought to that, maybe do a little bit of research into what kind of hydroponic system. Here they're looking at soil versus hydroponic. So there's been a lot of talk about, the benefits and pros and cons essentially of soil and hydroponic. And in your indoor ag or controlled environment classes, has there been, the research that I did during when you're designing these programs, it still seemed that you still get quite a bit of savings on water use in the hydroponics. So you can really reduce the amount of water compared to conventional field grown crops. I think that is still the case, unless anyone wants to pipe up and point out something that they learned in class otherwise. But water use tends to be much better in the indoor environment, hydroponics. Here they're actually showing an increase in beta carotene and lycopene in the tomato fruit that you eat. And so that's a definite plus, because those are good for our health. So there's some companies, one that I just recently saw a YouTube video of over in the Netherlands. It was really doing some great work in their indoor egg programs. They didn't do just hydroponics, but they did a mixture of hydroponics and soil growing in greenhouses. I think they were mainly greenhouses. I don't know if they did totally indoor, but they're reusing their water. So their wastewater, they're able to clean it up and pump it back in so that they're getting very sustainable on their water use. Because I know that that is one issue. We have to think about how to dispose of all that water that has minerals in it, and salts in it. You know, what do you do with that? And so that's an issue. If you think about another, I guess, concern that people have are the electrical costs, electricity for the lighting. And I think that's getting better and better with the LED technology, but I think that is something that definitely needs to be tracked. And I know when we were designing these programs, we met with the city of Marquette officials where they were, you know, it was really interesting talking with them because they were bringing up some of these issues like, well, if this goes big, you know, like potential of Marquette City, more hydroponics businesses popping up, like how is that going to impact our water treatment plant? And just thinking about all of that is a whole nother layer of things to think about when it comes to this type of industry. And then they also talked about the electrical grid and how much can the Marquette City, you know, what kind of burden is that going to place on the electrical grid? And so there are some real concerns, but we're not there yet. We don't have, we're not the mecca of hydroponic growing, and so it's not an issue right now. But you could see where they were thinking, you know, down the line, if this gets big, how are we going to deal with that? So there's definitely things that need to get worked out. This table is looking at, again, it's the same paper comparing the soil versus hydroponics. So if you could please read through this. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but you know, they give several different issues and kind of do the comparison. Which method do we see as a pro and which is it a con? And so I'd like you to think about these ideas. You know, they make good points in here of, you know, more of the conventional soil-based crop growing system versus the goes into this page as well. So one of the, do they have it? Yeah, okay. So is it here? Yeah, vulnerable to power outages, that's for sure. Hydroponics definitely have that issue. We need a backup generator. That last bullet point, not all plants are available for hydroponics. I think that's true right now, but it's getting better and better as we learn more how to work with different plants. The biofilm buildup, that's a thing that needs to be monitored continually. And so I understand that you had some issues with the rock wool that was delivered. I took some samples of that and plated it out, and yeah, you definitely had fungi growing in the rock wool. It was nasty. Has that been solved? I I didn't get it down to, it was some kind of mold based fungus, but I don't know exactly, you know, which species. Yeah, at the rock wool. Oh, oh, yeah, she mentioned that. Was that in the greenery? Yeah, that's what she was telling me. So, yeah, the greenery, They're supposed to upgrade it though.
They upgraded the software.
Okay.
They did what they
Okay.
did.
All right.
They
Yeah.
They gave us.
Right. Yeah. Well, they should, considering we've been troubleshooting that system for a while. So, so one, I know that like the Rockwell was contaminated, and that's not what you want. But one of my interests, the reason I started getting into indoor growing and hydroponic growing, even though most of my research expertise is all soil-based, is this idea that, okay, if we're going to go hydroponic, I can see a lot of advantages to hydroponic systems, but I think that if you do it right, the input of beneficial microbes could really boost the plant growth and then its nutrient quality and quantity. And so I've been looking at that, and I've had some research projects going on with grad students and others to look into this a little bit more closely. And so it's complicated, and it's funny because, when you look at earlier hydroponic growing systems, it was pretty much universal, no microbes allowed. Everything has to be sterile. We don't want microbes in any part of the system. And it's because if a pathogen gets into the system, it can quickly overwhelm the whole system, which I totally understand their, paranoia on that. But my argument is, well, if you have the beneficials in there, the pathogen would have far lower chance of wiping your whole system out. And so my goal is can you use beneficials to combat and balance out and hopefully kill off any pathogens, plus use them to increase the crop quality. And so they've been looking at this, and now the research is starting to take off where they are finding different plants, including cannabis, is helped by the presence of beneficial microbes in the hydroponic. But it's not like you can go to the store and buy this like beneficial powder, like get in and call it good. It's still in its infancy, but I think there's a ton of promise at using the microbes to combat pathogens, plus use them for growth promotion for the plant. And so this is from that same paper with this table. And this was kind of a review showing that there are some that are being more heavily looked at, including streptomyces, bacteria, other. But we also have worked with Pseudomonas, and then the trichoderma is August. Last two. And so, and then the other issue too is early on in the hydroponic research, they said mycorrhizal fungi don't grow in hydroponics. That was the boom, that's it. And then someone said, oh, really? And they started doing more research on it, and it finds out mycorrhizal fungi can grow in a hydroponic system. So I think that's a great thing to play around with as well, figure out what's going on. So they are, that area of research is still in its infancy, but it's growing. I see more and more people publishing on it now. And I think that it can be incredibly useful, but there's still a lot of research left to go. So, all right, well, we got to stop there. And so Wednesday, please come prepared to ask questions, and we'll go over the content starting from photosynthesis moving forward, and hopefully get your questions answered.